Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a deep dive into what is honestly one of the most breathtaking pieces of ancient poetry ever recorded, Isaiah 53. Specifically, we're going to zoom right in on verses 4 through 6. For centuries, this really brief passage has just captivated readers, mostly because of its intimate, almost unimaginable detail regarding the suffering servant. We're going to break down the whole shebang, the linguistic, historical, and spiritual weight of these three verses, and figure out exactly what this ancient text is revealing to us.
Okay, let's dive into this. It's one thing to say that someone suffered, right? But it's another thing entirely to capture the exact crushing weight of humanity's collective sorrow, and to do it in just a few short lines. So how on earth did an ancient prophet actually pull that off? Well, keep that question in the back of your mind as we unpack the history, the original Hebrew, and the true magnitude of these three very specific verses.
Isaiah chapter 53, verse 4, states, "Surely he hath borne our griefs, and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted." Just imagine a solitary figure out there in the wilderness, completely weighed down. This single sentence introduces the immense, really isolating burden of the prophecy. And the text isn't just speaking in abstract metaphors here. In the original context, the words griefs and sorrows actually imply real literal disease and pain. It's a powerful declaration that the suffering servant actively took on the visceral, lived experiences of human suffering.
To see this in action, we can look at the historical accounts of his miracles. There's some really fascinating commentary from Maclaren's expositions that points out a crucial detail here. These miracles weren't just effortless snaps of the fingers from some distant deity. Far from it. Before he took an affliction away, he identified deeply with it. He sighed in a silent appeal to heaven. He groaned inwardly. You see, his power to heal was directly linked to his capacity to feel the heavy weight of that suffering on his own shoulders first.
And this promise of literally carrying our grief, it reaches an absolutely harrowing climax in the Garden of Gethsemane. Matthew chapter 26, verses 38 through 39, and Luke chapter 22, verses 42 through 44, describe a physical toll that was so severe, his soul was exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. Luke even adds the incredible detail that while in agony, his sweat was as it were great drops of blood falling down to the ground. That ancient prophecy of carrying our grief was intensely physically realized right there in the deep shadows of those olive trees.
Now, in Doctrine and Covenants section 122, it says that even if the very jaws of hell shall gape open the mouth wide after thee, the Son of Man hath descended below them all. That modern revelation gives us such a terrifying, yet honestly awe-inspiring visual for this grief. It reinforces the absolute depths of the burden Isaiah was talking about. Basically, no matter how dark the pit is, the suffering servant encompassed the absolute entirety of human sorrow.
But here's what's really interesting about this. There is a tragic irony hidden in the original Hebrew. The word used for stricken is nagua, which properly translates to struck or smitten. As crowds of people stood there watching this suffering unfold, they made a massive, tragic assumption. According to Barnes' notes on the Bible, folks inferred that someone so despised must be experiencing divine punishment for his own sins. They esteemed him smitten of God, completely missing the fact that he was actually bearing their griefs. Talk about completely missing the mark.
Then, the prophecy abruptly shifts gears. Isaiah chapter 53, verse 5 states, "But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed." The tone plunges us straight from an emotional burden into violent physical trauma. The language here turns to the scourging, the spear, and the cross. That emotional weight totally gives way to physical devastation, and it explicitly links that trauma directly to the transgressions of humanity.
Genesis chapter 3, verse 15 states, "It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." Now this precise bruising was actually promised at the very dawn of humanity. Isaiah is basically showing us exactly what that ancient promise looked like when it became a reality. Being bruised for our iniquities wasn't just a metaphor. It meant being under such an incomprehensible weight of sorrow that he was literally crushed down to the earth, first in Gethsemane and then ultimately on the cross.
And we find a shockingly dark historical fulfillment of this chastisement of peace in the New Testament. John chapter 11, verses 47 through 51, states that the high priest Caiaphas, who was terrified of Roman destruction, makes this cold, brutal political argument. He declares to a council that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. Caiaphas meant this as a calculated murder to ensure political peace, but in doing so, he unwittingly prophesied and fulfilled Isaiah's exact words. The chastisement of our peace was placed entirely upon him.
Finally, Isaiah promises that with his stripes we are healed. Now, the original Hebrew word used here is chabarah, and it doesn't pull any punches. It translates to a stripe, a wheal, or a bruise, specifically the tactile, physical mark left by a blow to the skin. Barnes notes confirms that this points directly to the harsh, brutal historical reality of the Roman scourging post. The text is demanding that we look at the literal, physical wounds that were required to accomplish this profound, overarching spiritual healing.
And that brings us to verse 6, which forces a massive pivot. Isaiah chapter 53 verse 6 states, "All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all." So the crucial point is that it stops focusing on what was suffered and starts asking why. And the why is our collective wandering nature. Just like sheep scattered across a rugged landscape, humanity naturally turns to its own selfish paths. And in response to that universal straying, the Lord gathered up the entirety of that iniquity and laid it all on him.
To really wrap our heads around what it meant for the Lord to lay all of that iniquity on him, listen to this. In Doctrine and Covenants, section 18, verses 16 through 19, it says, "Which suffering caused myself, even God, the greatest of all, to tremble because of pain and to bleed at every pore." This is the staggering culmination of verse 6. The accumulated weight of every single soul that had ever gone astray resulted in an agony so absolute, so complete, that it caused the greatest of all to bleed from every pore. So, what does this all mean for us? Verses 4 through 6 of Isaiah 53 don't just predict a historical event, they outline a deliberate, literally universe-altering exchange. He bore our griefs, he took the physical wounds of our transgressions, and he carried the crushing weight of our collective wandering. As all of these source texts make perfectly clear, he endured the incomprehensible so that we wouldn't have to, if we just choose to turn back from our own ways and repent. When you really step back and look at the sheer, crushing magnitude of what was paid, the only question left is, how will you choose to respond to it? This concludes our overview.